The wagon jolted to a halt, its wooden frame groaning under the weight of provisions it no longer needed to carry. A harsh wind swept across the barren plains, stirring the dust and snapping at Eleanor Whitmore's threadbare shawl. She clutched it tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to stave off the creeping cold. Beside her, Clara let out a small, pitiful cough, and Eleanor placed a steadying hand on her younger sister's back. The child trembled beneath her fingers. "Out," Jed Whitmore said flatly, not even bothering to meet her eyes. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Please, just a few more miles. There's a town near the river. We can—" "No," Jed's voice was firm, devoid of sympathy. "We ain't wasting another day feeding mouths that ain't earned their keep." Atop the wagon, his wife, Martha, pursed her lips in a tight line, her hands fidgeting over her apron. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw hesitation flicker in the woman's eyes, but it vanished as soon as Jed turned toward her. "You got what's yours," Martha said. "Now get." Eleanor's fingers curled into fists. They had no guns, no horse, and barely a handful of provisions. She had pleaded with them to let her and Clara stay after William's death, but they had only given her silence and cold glances. She understood now. There had never been a future for them with the Whitmores, only the illusion of one until it no longer suited them. The wagon lurched forward before she could muster another plea, its wheels kicking up dust and scattering pebbles in its wake. Eleanor coughed, squinting through the haze, watching until the silhouette of the wagon faded into the horizon. They were alone. Clara's breath hitched. She was only 12, small for her age, and growing thinner by the day. Eleanor turned and crouched before her, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "We'll be all right," she said softly. Clara's lip quivered. "It's cold." Eleanor nodded, glancing at the sky. The sun had begun its slow descent, dragging the temperature with it. Nights in the frontier were cruel, even in early autumn. If it didn't find shelter soon, the cold would finish what the Whitmores had started. She slung the burlap sack over her shoulder and took Clara's hand. "Come on, we'll walk till we find cover." Clara's fingers were icy in her grasp, but she squeezed them reassuringly. The two of them started forward, moving with the last slivers of daylight toward a land that neither welcomed nor cared for them. The night was worse than Eleanor had expected. She had found a patch of dry brush nestled between two outcroppings of rock, just enough to break the wind. But the cold sank into their bones, numbing fingers and toes, turning breath to mist. Eleanor had wrapped herself around Clara, shielding her as best she could, but neither of them slept. Hunger gnawed at her insides. Their food supply consisted of a meager strip of jerky and a stale biscuit. Rations meant for one, not two. Clara coughed again, and Eleanor pulled her closer. She couldn't let her get sick. Not out here. The night stretched on, long and merciless. Every rustle of the wind, every distant howl of a coyote sent Eleanor's heart hammering in her chest. Her knife, an old, rusted thing she had found discarded near their makeshift camp, felt pitifully small in her grip. If anything came for them, she would have little chance of fighting it off. But nothing came. Not yet. When the first rays of dawn spilled over the horizon, Eleanor rose stiffly, her joints aching from the cold. Clara's face was pale, her lips dry and cracked. She needed food, water, warmth, things Eleanor could not provide. She pulled Clara to her feet. "We keep walking." Hours passed. The sun climbed high, but it brought little relief. The land stretched before them in an endless sea of dirt and sparse brush, offering no sign of civilization. Their water had run out before noon, leaving Eleanor's throat raw and her head heavy with thirst. Clara's steps grew slower, her body leaning against Eleanor for support. Then, in the distance, movement. Eleanor froze, gripping Clara's arm. Riders. They were a dark mass against the horizon, kicking up dust as they moved. There were 5, maybe 6, men, their figures shifting and blurring with the heat waves rising from the ground. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She could not tell who they were, but she knew enough of the world to understand one truth. No good ever came from men on horseback finding stranded women on the plains. "Clara," she whispered, "listen to me. If I tell you to run, you run. The riders drew closer. Eleanor forced herself to stand tall, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. Running would be useless. They had horses. They would catch them within minutes. She had only one chance, to stand firm and hope, however foolishly, that they would pass them by. They did not. The men slowed, their horses snorting and stamping at the ground. Dust swirled around them as they stopped a dozen yards away. The leader, a man with a face carved from leather and eyes like coal, grinned. Well now, he drawled. Ain't this a rare sight? Eleanor's grip tightened around the knife hidden in her skirt. Lost, are ya? Another man said, his smile dripping with something vile. Eleanor swallowed. We have nothing worth taking. The leader chuckled. That's so? 'Cause I see two real fine reasons to stick around. The other men laughed, shifting in their saddles. Eleanor's stomach turned. She had heard stories. Settler women vanishing on the frontier, their fates sealed the moment they fell into the wrong hands. She would not let that happen. She stepped in front of Clara, angling her body to shield her sister. Leave us be. The leader's grin widened. Or what, girl? You gonna cut me with that little pig sticker you got hiding? Eleanor flinched, but she did not move. The men exchanged glances, their amusement turning to something else, something darker. The leader nudged his horse forward. Ain't no law out here, darlin'. No one to hear you scream. Clara whimpered behind her. Eleanor's heart pounded. She would not let them touch her. She would not let them. A sound split the air. Sharp, fast, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Then another. One of the riders jerked violently, his body lurching sideways before slumping to the ground. The others barely had time to react before another arrow found its mark, striking the leader square in the chest. He let out a strangled gasp, his horse rearing beneath him. Chaos erupted. Eleanor stumbled backward, dragging Clara with her. Shadows moved across the ridge above, figures emerging with bows drawn, their movements precise and swift. The riders panicked. Two of them tried to flee, spurring their horses into a full gallop. Another arrow whistled through the air, catching one in the back. The last man, wild-eyed and frantic, turned his horse sharply, trying to escape. He did not make it. A final shot sent him tumbling into the dust, his body twitching before going still. Silence fell. Eleanor's breath came in short gasps. The scent of blood mingled with the dry earth. The figures on the ridge began their descent, stepping into the light. They were not more bounty hunters. They were warriors. Navajo. One of them, a tall man with a sharp gaze and a presence that made the very air around him feel heavier, stepped forward. His dark eyes flicked to the bodies, then to Eleanor and Clara. She did not move. She could not. He studied them for a long moment, then spoke. You were left to die. It was not a question. Eleanor forced herself to meet his gaze. Yes. His expression did not change. He glanced at Clara, then back to Eleanor. Come, he said. Eleanor hesitated. She had spent her life hearing warnings, stories whispered by frightened settlers. But those men on horseback, the asterisk had been the true danger. She took Clara's hand and followed. The fire crackled low, sending thin tendrils of smoke curling into the night air. Eleanor sat stiffly, hands wrapped around a tin cup filled with something warm and bitter. It burned as it slid down her throat, but she drank anyway. Across from her, Clara dozed, wrapped in a thick buffalo hide someone had tossed her way. The girl's breaths were slow, even the exhaustion of the past 2 days finally taking hold. Around them, the Navajo men spoke in quiet tones, their voices blending with the night. They moved with practiced ease, tending to their horses, checking their weapons, preparing for the journey ahead. Eleanor watched them, uncertain of her place in this camp, uncertain of the man who had spared them without explanation. He sat a few feet away, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His name, she had learned, was Azza-Tikadi, wolf that stands alone. A fitting name. His presence commanded attention without demand, his dark eyes missing nothing. Eleanor took another sip from her cup before forcing herself to speak. Why did you help us? Wolf did not look up from his blade. You would be dead otherwise. It was not an answer, not really. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the cup. There were 6 of them. You had no reason to interfere. Wolf finally lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. Men like that do not belong on this land. She held a stare. She wanted to believe it was that simple, that this was an act of justice, not pity. But she had seen too much of the world to trust in simple kindness. No one gave without expecting something in return. She glanced toward Clara, then back at Wolf. "Where are you taking us?" He slid the knife back into its sheath and rose to his feet. "To a place where you will not die." That was the last he said to her that night. The journey westward was grueling. The Navajo rode at a steady, relentless pace, their horses covering ground Eleanor would have never managed on foot. They did not speak much, save for the occasional word between themselves, and no one offered Eleanor an explanation as to where they were going. She had stopped asking. They traveled through dry, cracked plains and along winding trails that wove between red rock formations towering high into the sky. The land was different here, wilder than anything Eleanor had known. She had spent her life in the settlements, clinging to what little civilization the frontier could offer. Out here, there was no such thing. Clara rode with one of the younger warriors, a man named Nantan. He had a quiet patience about him, often glancing back to make sure Eleanor was still following. Once, when Clara had grown too weak to sit upright, he had lifted her with ease, holding her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. Eleanor did not know what to make of these men. They were warriors, that much was clear, but they were not cruel. They had saved her, given her food, even shared their water when hers had run out. And yet, there was a distance between them, an unspoken understanding that she did not belong among them. It was Wolf she watched the most. He rode at the front, never speaking unless spoken to, his posture rigid as though he carried the weight of something unseen. There was a scar along his jaw, a deep line that disappeared beneath his collar. He did not wear a gun, only a knife and a bow slung across his back. And yet, Eleanor had no doubt that he was the deadliest among them. It was on the 3rd night that she finally had her answer. They had made camp beneath the cliffs, the firelight casting long shadows against the rock walls. Eleanor sat near Clara, brushing dirt from the girl's tangled hair, when Wolf approached. "You will leave in the morning." Eleanor tensed. She had known this moment would come, but it still sent a jolt of fear through her. "Where?" "There is a settlement 2 days' ride from here. A trader passes through. He will take you." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "And if he doesn't?" Wolf's expression did not change. "Then you will find another way." She rose to her feet. "You're sending us away with nothing? You are alive." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "That is more than you would have been." Anger flared in her chest. "We have nowhere to go. That is not my concern." Eleanor stared at him, fists clenched at her sides. "Why save us at all, then? Why not leave us to die like the Whitmores did?" For the first time, something flickered across his face, something like hesitation. It was gone just as quickly. "You are not my enemy," he said, voice quieter now. "But you are not my people." Eleanor's breath caught. It was the truth, cold and unyielding. She had known it from the moment she stepped into their camp, from the way the others looked at her with guarded eyes. She was an outsider. She always would be. She turned away before he could see the sting of it in her face. Dawn came too soon. Eleanor packed what little she had, some dried meat, a water skin, a blanket Clara could barely lift on her own. The horse they had been given was old but sturdy, its coat a deep chestnut. She helped Clara onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. The others watched in silence, offering no goodbyes. Wolf handed her the reins. Their fingers brushed, just for a moment. "Do not stop until you reach the settlement." Eleanor met his gaze. "And if I don't?" Something dark passed through his eyes. "Then you will die." She nodded once, then nudged the horse forward. She did not look back. The first day passed without incident. The landscape stretched wide and empty. The only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves against dry earth and the occasional rustle of wind through the brush. Clara barely spoke. She leaned against Eleanor, her body feverish, her breath shallow. Eleanor pressed a hand to her forehead. Too warm. She gritted her teeth. 2 days. That was all she needed. Just 2 days. The night fell heavy and cold. Eleanor pulled Clara close beneath the blanket, listening to the distant howls of coyotes. Sleep did not come. When morning broke, Clara could barely sit upright. Panic gnawed at Eleanor's chest. She pressed the last of their water to Clara's lips, but the girl barely swallowed. No, not now. Not when they were so close. Eleanor urged the horse forward, faster than before. Hours passed. The sun rose high, beating down on them, turning the air thick and suffocating. Eleanor's mouth was dry, her limbs heavy, but she did not stop. Then movement, distant but growing closer. Eleanor's pulse quickened. A group of men, 6 or 7, riding toward them. She reined in the horse, heart pounding. Were they settlers? Ranchers? Or worse? She had no time to decide. The men slowed, eyes raking over her. One, a burly man with a thick beard, grinned. Well, ain't often you see a lady all on her lonesome out here. Eleanor's grip tightened on the reins. We're just passing through. The man's grin widened. That's so? Looks like you could use some help. Behind her, Clara stirred weakly. The man's eyes flicked to her. His expression darkened. That your kid? My sister. The man exchanged a look with the others. Eleanor's stomach turned. They were not here to help. She reached for the knife at her waist, but before she could draw it, a sharp whistle cut through the air. The men stiffened. From the ridge above, movement. Then, a familiar shadow. Wolf. Eleanor's breath caught. The leader's expression twisted. You got business with these two, Injun? Wolf did not answer. The silence stretched. Then, without warning, an arrow struck the ground inches from the man's boot. He cursed, jerking his horse back. Wolf's voice was quiet. Leave. A tense moment. Then, the men wheeled their horses around and rode off, dust billowing in their wake. Eleanor exhaled shakily. Wolf approached, his gaze flicking between her and Clara. You did not make it far. Eleanor swallowed. She's sick. Wolf studied Clara for a long moment. Then he reached down, lifting the girl from the saddle as if she weighed nothing. Eleanor stared. What are you doing? Wolf looked at her. Taking you somewhere you won't die. This time, she did not argue. The trail narrowed between towering red rock formations, their jagged edges casting long shadows in the fading light. Eleanor rode in silence, her hands tight on the reins, watching Wolf as he guided his horse ahead. Clara lay limp against him, her fever worsening, her small body too weak to shiver against the cold. Eleanor had long since stopped questioning why he had returned for them. She had too many other concerns pressing against her ribs. Clara's labored breathing, the dwindling supplies, the distant promise of safety that now felt like a mirage stretching just out of reach. The others had not come with him. Wolf rode alone. It did not sit right in Eleanor's gut, but she held her tongue, trusting for now that wherever he was leading them, it was not toward another grave. After another mile, the canyon walls gave way to an open valley, the land rolling in soft waves of sage and yellowed grass. A river cut through the center, its dark waters reflecting the last embers of the sun. Nestled against the cliffs was a small dwelling, stone and timber, built low against the wind. Smoke curled from a chimney. The scent of burning would carried on a breeze. Wolf dismounted without a word and lifted Clara down with care. Eleanor scrambled from her saddle, reaching for her sister, but Wolf was already striding toward the house. Wait! Eleanor hurried after him, her boots kicking up dust. He did not slow. The door creaked as he pushed inside, the dim interior swallowing them whole. The warmth hit Eleanor first, thick and heavy after the biting air outside. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting flickering light against the walls. Herbs hung from the beams, their earthy scent mingling with something sharper, medicinal, bitter. A woman stood near the fire, her hair braided with silver strands, her dark eyes narrowing as Wolf entered. You bring trouble, she said in Navajo. Wolf said nothing. He laid Clara down on a pile of thick blankets, then stepped back. The woman studied the girl for a long moment before kneeling beside her. She touched Clara's forehead, then pressed her fingers against the girl's throat. Her expression did not change, but when she spoke, her words were clipped. She burns from the inside. Eleanor, step forward. Can you help her? The woman's gaze flicked to her, unreadable. Then she rose and moved toward a wooden chest against the wall, retrieving a bundle of dried plants. She needs water and time. It was not the reassurance Eleanor had hoped for, but it was something. She knelt beside Clara, smoothing damp hair from the girl's face. Clara's breathing was shallow, her lips dry and cracked. Eleanor swallowed against the fear clawing at her throat. "Who is she?" she asked Wolf, her voice low. "My mother." Eleanor glanced up. The resemblance was there, now that she saw them together. The same sharp features, the same unyielding gaze. Wolf's mother returned with a bowl of steaming water, a dark mixture swirling within. She lifted Clara's head with practiced care, pressing the rim of the bowl to her lips. Eleanor watched, helpless. Then, as if sensing her thoughts, Wolf's mother spoke again. "She will not die tonight." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaling. The wind howled through the canyons that night. Eleanor sat near the fire, arms wrapped around her knees, unable to sleep. Across the room, Clara rested, her breaths still uneven but no longer rattling in her chest. Wolf sat near the door, sharpening his knife in slow, measured strokes. The sound filled the silence between them. Eleanor had 100 questions, but only one felt pressing. "Why did you come back?" Wolf did not stop the motion of the blade against the stone. "You would not have survived. That didn't bother you before." His hand stilled. She waited, watching the way the firelight cast shadows against his face. He looked different here, less like the hardened warrior who had cut down 6 men in the dust, more like someone carrying the weight of too many ghosts. Finally, he said, "You remind me of someone." Eleanor's breath caught. Before she could ask who, Wolf stood, sliding the knife back into its sheath. "Get some rest." Then he was gone, disappearing into the night. Eleanor stared after him, the unanswered question settling in her bones. Clara's fever broke at dawn. Eleanor woke to find the girl blinking up at her, her eyes no longer clouded with sickness. Relief swelled in Eleanor's chest, so sudden and overwhelming that she almost wept. Wolf's mother knelt beside them, pressing a cool cloth to Clara's forehead. "She is strong," she said simply. Eleanor smiled, brushing a stray curl from Clara's face. "Stronger than she looks." A knock sounded against the wooden door. Wolf's mother rose, opening it just enough to see who stood outside. A brief exchange in Navajo. Then she turned to Wolf. "They are here." Eleanor's stomach twisted. Wolf stepped outside, and after a beat, Eleanor followed. In the morning light, 3 men sat astride their horses near the riverbank. They were not Navajo. Their clothes were dusty and worn, their guns strapped openly to their hips. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his temple to his chin, watched Wolf with cold calculation. "Had a feeling we'd find you here." Wolf said nothing. The man tilted his head toward Eleanor. "The girl with you?" Eleanor's pulse pounded. Wolf's voice was flat. "She is no concern of yours." The man smirked. "See, I like to believe that, but here's the thing." He swung down from his saddle, boots crunching against the dirt. "Her name's been circulating real fast. A couple of men in Gallows Creek want her dead. Badly." Eleanor stiffened. The man took another step forward. "Problem is, those fellas are already dead, killed by a handful of arrows out in the dust." He eyed Wolf. Real curious thing that. Tension coiled in the air. Then the man exhaled, shaking his head. "Look, I ain't interested in whatever trouble you got brewing. I just want what's owed. That little girl inside, she's worth a good chunk of money to some real mean folks." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Wolf's voice was like steel. "She is not yours to take." The man sighed. "Didn't figure you'd make this easy." He moved fast. His hand barely brushed his holster before Wolf struck. A blur of motion. Then the man was on the ground, clutching his throat as blood seeped between his fingers. The other 2 men scrambled for their guns. Wolf dropped one with a knife to the gut before the second could even aim. The last man swung his revolver toward Eleanor. A gunshot split the air. The man staggered, a hole punched clean through his chest. Eleanor's hands trembled around the grip of her pistol. Smoke curled from the barrel. The man hit the ground, dust rising around him. Silence. Wolf turned to her. She met his gaze, breathing hard. Then, behind them, Clara's weak voice. Eleanor. Eleanor turned. Clara stood in the doorway, her small frame barely steady. Eleanor's chest tightened. She stepped forward, scooping the girl into her arms. Wolf's mother stepped past them, surveying the bodies with a calm, knowing gaze. "This is not over," she murmured. Wolf wiped his blade against his sleeve. "No, it isn't." Eleanor held Clara close, her pulse still thrumming in her ears. She knew then, with cold certainty, they were being hunted, and the worst was yet to come.